afternoon and welcome to Black Milwaukee and Oral History Project. My name is William Rogers and I am the president of the Milwaukee chapter of the Association for the Study of Afro American Life and History. Currently, we have embarked upon a project to record the history of Black Milwaukee, and we are recording it by those who have participated and made it possible. Before we begin our program this afternoon, I would like to take a few minutes to thank so many of the people who have helped put this project together. First, I'd like to start with Miss Marilyn Lock, the executive producer of Afro American Soul, who has been so instrumental in making this possible. I'd also like to thank the staff and the workers of Matter for their input and their cooperation and the use of their studios and facility for making this project also possible. I'd also like to thank member of our organization, Mr. Reuben Harpole, for his input and his guidance, and also providing us with the people necessary to make this project a reality. This afternoon, we're going to be talking with a man who was very instrumental in a part of Milwaukee's history. One of the most important institutions in an African-American community is the black newspapers. The black newspapers are important for a couple of reasons. First of all, they record the history. They allow us an opportunity to go back decades and decades and look at what that particular city was all about and some of the things that were going on in the African-American community at that time. Well, we are privileged today to have one of the publishers of one of those great papers back during that time, Mr. Sanford Carter, who was the publisher of a newspaper called the Milwaukee Globe. The Milwaukee Globe operated between the years of 1946 and 1949. And today we will be talking with Mr. Carter about some of that history around that period and what was going on in Milwaukee. Mr. Carter, welcome to our project. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
First of all, let me start off by asking, how long have you been a resident of the city of Milwaukee?
60 years.
So you entered here about
1931.
31, right. Where was home prior to that?
Texas, Wichita Falls, Texas.
I see, okay. Now, when you came to Milwaukee, you were coming with your parents, I assume?
My parents were here. I came after I'd finished high school.
I see, right. What were your parents doing at that time here in Milwaukee?
My father was a government meat inspector, and my mother was I think she worked for the Wisconsin Electric Company.
I see. Government meat inspector, I assume that's the U.S., what's considered now the USDA. Yes. And that's pretty, I guess that was a big step for an African-American in the 1930s.
Yes.
Milwaukee, yes. Were there many blacks here at that time doing that type of thing in government?
Well, there were possibly 2 or 3 who had that same job of job.
See. Mm-hmm. Where did you live here in Milwaukee when you first? Where were your parents living?
My first address was 6th Street, 1900 block. Mm-hmm. Right next door to the old Rada Bakery, if anybody remembers that.
I see. And was that an African-American community, or was it basically mixed?
Yeah.
They were a lot...
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Was that mainly the main thrust of the black community at that point?
Well, it was a couple of blocks up. The real thrust, of course, was Walnut Street and right. That area. That was the kind of the lifeblood of the of Milwaukee. Mm-hmm.
Now, when you came here during that time, what about the black businesses? How many were here? Were there many on Walnut Street at that point in 1931?
Well, there weren't too many black-owned businesses because the business area was only a couple of blocks long, you see, as far as the black ownership was concerned. So there were a restaurant or 2. Clara's Restaurant was quite a famous eating place in the black community, and there was a few taverns, 7-Eleven, which came along later. And let's see, I can't think of any other. There were several things that developed after I came here. Right. And when I came here, they weren't. I guess Clara's Restaurant was here, and...
What about black newspapers? Was there a black newspaper here at the time?
No, not as I can recall.
1930s. Right.
Yeah. Of course, the Enterprise Blade, that came out every election year. Every 4 years, that was published by J. Anthony Josie.
Right. Now, during that time, who was the mayor of Milwaukee? Do you remember that?
The mayor at that time, in 1931, I think it was Home. HOA Horn.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the political climate for African Americans, was that, do you...
Well, it wasn't so, the climate wasn't so active. I mean, politically it wasn't so active. There were only a few people who were involved in politics.
Did they have an NAACP chapter at that time in the 1930s?
1931? Well, I don't recall whether they did or not.
Okay. What about Urban League? Was that...
Urban League was here, yeah.
Urban League was here then.
Yeah, they were down on 9th and Vine, not 9th and Vine, on 7th and Valete at the time when I came here.
Now you were out of high school, fresh out of high school.
Right out of high school.
And what did you do when you got here? Did you...
I came and well, in the summertime, so I played baseball until I went to college. I started at college in September of the year that I came, 1932.
Okay, what college did you attend?
Milwaukee State Teachers College.
Oh, that's now, what's now University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee?
Yes.
Right. Now, at that time, what was the school like?
The school had two buildings, one on Downer Avenue and this field house, which had just been completed when I started. And we had 1,100 students maybe, and
1,100?
1,100 students now.
Students,
and you had about 2 Afro Americans, maybe 3.
Okay.
That's what it was.
Right, exactly. Now, if at that point education was teachers' college was a major focus, right?
That's correct.
Right. Well, let's take a break and then we'll come right back. Welcome back. We are here talking with Mr. Sanford Carter, former publisher of the Milwaukee Globe newspaper. Mr. Sanford, before our break, Mr. Carter, before our break, we talked a little bit about the Teachers College curriculum and some of the educational setup during that time. What were some of the courses that were offered, just to give us a little brief history, an idea?
Well, they offered music, chemistry, physics, English, a regular college curriculum geared toward teaching, of course.
Right. Were there any African American instructors at that time?
Oh no.
No, that was still. Who was the chancellor at that point? I guess.
At that point, it was Frank Baker. Yeah, Baker was his last
Frank
name.
Baker. And so you were preparing yourself for a career in education.
Not really. I was just getting an education. I never had any year to teach.
Okay. Was that a 4-year program?
Yes.
At the time, 4-year program. And were you a graduate of at that point?
At that point, no.
I mean, were you a graduate then? Did you finally graduate from?
No. I went I attended 3 years, and then it just so happens that I fell in love and got married my second year.
I see. All right.
And I had to change my direction.
I see. But that made you have to put a little bit more. Now, what was your wife's name and where was she from?
Her name was Juanita Colon before I married her, and she's a native Milwaukeean.
I see. Right. And at that point, you became a family man, began to raise a family?
Well, I became a family man, and then our family started in 1937.
Okay. Now, where does the Wisconsin Globe, the Milwaukee Globe, come about? When does it begin? What was the brainchild behind it? And
Milwaukee Globe began around 1946. I guess we saw the need of some type of voice in the community, and several of us young men at the time got together and discussed the situation, and we thought that we would try to put together a newspaper.
Okay. Now, when you said the need, what was some of the theory behind that need? What was causing the need?
Well, the need was to call attention to the situation in the community, to try to get the African American community involved in the political structure, because you know politics is the essence of existence here, and also to try to get the economic situation improved.
Right, because at this point, America is coming out of the Depression.
Yeah, it was the end of the Depression.
Yeah, right. It was the end of the Depression for the African Americans.
No, in '46, I guess it had emerged out I thought you were referring to when I got here.
Right. No,
but
I know
when the Globe started, it had emerged from the Depression a couple of years.
Exactly. Now, 46, at the time of the Globe, Roosevelt was president. Is that correct?
Who?
Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt.
In
40.
46?
Right. Or had we gone into...
No, Roosevelt he was the president in the 30s, I think, 36, somewhere in there.
Okay, and at that point, was Truman in that at that particular point? I don't recall.
Let's see. I don't recall.
Okay, all right. I'm trying to see what the national climate was like at that particular time. I know that was prior to Brown v. Board of Education, naturally, because that didn't happen until the 50s. But there was a lot of trend in the country at that time to get away from segregation and begin to move toward a more integrated society.
Yes.
You know, now how was Milwaukee caught up in that movement?
Well, Milwaukee, of course, has always been rather polarized, I'd say. There were sections of ethnic residents in one part of the city. That's the way it was structured. So I guess it would, I don't know what you'd call it, racist at that time, but that was the structure of the living in Milwaukee.
Was there a better working environment?
Oh yes,
much better working environment.
Much better because of the numerous manufacturing concerns around the city, and they utilized many of the African American men, and of course skilled labor was still very much needed.
I see.
And unskilled labor was very much needed, and so the big manufacturing companies you employed a lot of African American men.
Now, the ideas behind the Globe were more to bring the attention of the community to the local affairs, is that right? Not so much the national affairs, but more local affairs, to get people more politically involved, is that right?
Bring the local government, the local government structure, bring it to their attention so that they would be able to know just what the situation was, where the problems were, and some suggested remedies.
I see. Now, in terms of the ideology behind your group of people that wanted to start this paper, was it ever a money-making venture? Was it ever to be a money-making venture? Or did you think about, you know, possibly, I know it was a profit, it had a profit structure, but was that a primary concern in this organization?
Not really. We just hoped that we would make money, but we weren't dependent upon it. The men who were in it weren't dependent upon its profitability.
What were you doing at that time? What was your position?
I was an employee at the Milwaukee Post Office at the time.
I see. All right. Okay. Now, I had looked at a couple of the old issues of the Globe. I looked at, matter of fact, a particular one on October 2nd, 1948, and at that point you listed a long list of owners of the company. And maybe if we could just kind of take a look at that list and mention some of those names and find out where these gentlemen are. Now, one was Vincent Beverance, is that?
Vincent C. Beverneau. Vincent Beverneau was a veterinarian, and he was employed by the government, U.S. government, but of course he's deceased now.
I see. Charles Bruce?
Charles Bruce was, he also was an employee of the Milwaukee Post Office. There were two of us at the time.
I see.
And,
were you the only two there?
Yeah.
At the time? Right.
And he also operated what he called the Harlem Record Shop right next door to where the Globe was.
Oh, I see.
Office of the Globe.
Okay, and then what about Mr. John Williams?
John Williams was, he was a teacher. He had attended State Teachers College also.
I see.
And he had graduated, and he was a teacher.
Okay, we're going to come back and talk about a few more of those previous owners, but let's first take a break. We're Afro American people. We're back with Black Milwaukee and Oral History Project, and we'll talk with Mr. Sanford Carter, former publisher of the Milwaukee Globe. Before our break, Mr. Carter, we were talking about a few of the founders. We mentioned, was Mr. Bruce living now? Is Mr. Bruce?
No, he's also...
He's still deceased. What about Mr. Williams?
John Williams is still here.
He's still here, okay. And then that's with Sanford Carter, and you said that time you were at the post office. Mr. William Tucker.
William Tucker is now residing in Seattle, Washington.
I see.
He's been there for some years. I don't know whether he's still living or not.
Do you recall his profession during that time?
Well, he was, he worked for some concern, I don't remember.
Right, okay. Mr. Colbert, Cleveland Colbert, another name that was on that list.
Cleveland Colbert, he was on that list?
Yes, he was on that list as one of the owners, yes.
As one of the owners?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think that he was. I think that must have been an error.
An error, okay.
Because Cleveland Colbert was, he was a man around town, but he never had any.
I see, all right. Mr. Saunders, Lawrence Saunders.
Lawrence Saunders was, he was part of the Globe, and...
okay. He was also listed as the editor at one point.
Well, that was the time when we were going down, and the other fellows had probably dropped out and that sort of thing, and he was still trying to carry on the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
He's now in Madison.
He's in Madison. What about Mr. Colbert? Is he still living? Is he here?
Colbert, I don't know.
Right, all right. Ernest Peace.
Ernest Peace was a photographer.
I see.
Ernest Peace was a young man who was physically handicapped, and he took all of our pictures. I
see, all right. And then Andrew Renault, I think it is.
Well, Andrew Renault, if you're aware of the fact, is the head of the, what is the family, he's a family court commissioner, I think that's his title. He's the head of the family court.
I see.
Right now, he's...
What was he at that point? What
Andy was in law school when we started, and he was going to be a lawyer.
All right. Was he at Marquette or?
Yes.
Yeah. Fine. Okay. So this was basically the core group of organizers. Mm-hmm. I guess you set the company up as a stock, on a stock basis.
Yeah. Andy, by the way, gave the paper its name, the Milwaukee Globe. That was Andy Renault's idea.
I see. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I guess you all were equal partners in the venture. Yeah. Yes. And you use your own personal money to, in terms of its investment.
Right.
Now, what about printing of the paper at that time? What was the ideas around how were you going to get it printed? And...
Well, we scoured around to get somebody to print it, and I think we went as far as Gary, Indiana, to have it printed.
I see.
And then we had somebody out at Hale's Corners who was doing the printing, so it was quite a
venture to do that.
Yes.
Now, it was a weekly paper.
Weekly.
Correctly, weekly paper, and you would need to then at that point begin the editors. Who was your editor, your first editor?
I guess probably John Williams would be called the first editor.
Mm-hmm. Right. Did he have journalism background at that time?
No, John was just I say he was his teacher, so he had that experience and that knowledge, so that he would be able to put together stories.
Now, I noticed in your masthead of the paper it said that the Wisconsin's only black newspaper. So I guess this was kind of like an excitement at that point for the
Well, I guess it was. Yeah.
Did you have like a big grand opening doing that?
No, we couldn't afford that. No.
And to introduce I figured to introduce the concept. Was this a family project? Were your wives involved in it as well?
Well, they tolerated it.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you recall what was the first lead story of the first issue? Because I've looked for first issues, but I can't. The State Historical Society, the Milwaukee County Historical Society.
I can't recall.
Okay. Do you recall in a major issue that you went after sort of vehemently during that time? Was there something that? What about when Brown came into resistance? When the old integration issue?
I think that we were not in circulation at that time.
Oh, you were not. I see. Okay. No. Now, the other national newspapers around the country, I understand that there was a paper in Chicago, which is now part of the Chicago Defender, was also publishing an edition here. Mm-hmm. Were they still in operation during that time, or had they ceased?
The Milwaukee Defender.
Was that
I think they were. The only other Chicago newspaper that I can recall at that time was a Bee, Chicago Bee.
Okay.
And they was distributed rather by a fellow, can't remember his name either.
Okay.
But he called him the Bee Man.
But they had a Milwaukee edition of it?
They had well, I don't know. Then anyway, he was a distributor here for the Bee.
Now, the lifeblood of any newspaper naturally is advertising. Mm. How did that fit in? A lot of times that's a lot of work.
Well, we did a lot of work. And the advertising didn't, of course, pan out as we had anticipated. So it was, we could only depend on the local merchants to do advertising, and of course they weren't in the greatest position to give us a great amount of advertising. So we
had to be limited, man.
Yeah, well, our advertising space wasn't 1/10 as much as we would like it to.
Now, who was around at that time? A.O. Smith was here naturally, and did you?
Oh well,
did you get any support from him?
No.
Right. Had you approached him?
I don't recall. You know, in those days, approaching big companies like that wasn't an easy job either for an African American.
Right.
Because well, that was they felt that they didn't really have to tolerate this type of thing. They could get along without it. And of course, that was before A.O. Smith was open up to employment of African Americans.
Okay. Now I noticed also that I looked in the want-ad section of a couple of the back editions, and again, it goes back to what you said. There were just not a lot of ads and jobs available. But what about the government, state, city government? Were they supportive?
Well, you see, all the civil service jobs, we call them. Civil service jobs were acquired by taking an examination, and if you passed examinations, you were able to get a job with whatever city, state.
But what about the announcements of these jobs?
Well, of course, the announcements of these jobs were posted in some of the papers, and but you had to go to the courthouse or the federal building. You could see them there.
Right, exactly. Now, I noticed that, you know, also one of the major social critics in African American life has been a man by the name of E. Franklin Frazier. You know, we wrote a book called The Black Bourgeois. He attacked black newspapers back in the 1930s and 40s real heavily, saying that they were only social registers, that they were only lists of social news, and they only carried who was doing what of any prominence in the community. You know, he didn't go to the grassroots. Is that true? Would you say that was a true statement by Frazier? You know, you being a publisher, were your concerns different than that?
Well, one of our concerns was selling newspapers.
Okay.
Now, in order for us to sell newspapers in the community, we would have to get news of the community so that the people were interested. So it's just one of those situations that was necessary.
Exactly.
I presume you couldn't sell newspapers with a lot of national news or anything like that. Your base was the community. Consequently, you had to have news that was interesting to the community. So the social life, that's what sold newspapers.
Let's take a break and we'll come right back.
We're Afro-American people with Afro-American soul. We're Afro-American people with Afro.
We're back and we're talking with Mr. Sanford Carter, the publisher of the Milwaukee Globe. We were talking a little bit about the philosophy of your newspaper and some of the things that you were trying to reach and the people that you were trying to reach out to. We talked about the criticism of E. Franklin Frazier, and I think you successfully answered that. I agree with you. I think you have to reach your readers. You can't always, the grassroots not reading the paper, then you can't necessarily always reach them. You have to get who's after the paper. Now, we mentioned a little bit about government involvement in terms of its advertising approach. Who was the mayor at that point and at the time you all started the paper? And what kind of support?
1946. Now, I guess the mayor at that time was Frank Seidler.
All right. Now, I noticed he appeared a couple of times with you and a couple of other members of the organization at that.
Yes.
Now, so the Wisconsin Globe, I mean, the Milwaukee Globe had a very strong life naturally in the first 46, 47. At what point do you feel changes began to occur and you saw maybe that you might have been losing a steer of the vessel, you know, and it was kind of...
Well, in 1946, I believe, is around the ending of the Second World War, I believe, was around 1946, and the men were returning from the war, and they were getting jobs. Boy, they were getting jobs. They were getting jobs, and they were moving out and buying homes and moving out of the community. And then there were, of course, other newspapers that were coming in,
right.
weekly papers. And so, since our profit wasn't any profit, we had to closed down because we couldn't afford to. We just couldn't afford to keep printing the paper.
So actually, when the war did end and the soldiers were coming on, there was a transition in the community, a big transition.
Yes.
And I guess basically based on some of the GI benefits, and the soldiers were able to purchase homes.
Employment was good.
Where did they start going? Where were they moving to?
Well, you see, our community at the time the newspaper was in existence was rather narrow. Say from 1200 north to 2300 north, from River, where we are now, until maybe 12th, 13th Street, someplace that was the heart of our community. Now, if you don't know why I said 12, that's Juneau Avenue south, North Avenue north, and that was the compact, and most of the African Americans lived in that area.
Okay. Now, so they began at that point when the soldiers came home to go northward?
Oh yes, northward, westward.
Westward out, which is where we are today, past Hampton and getting into that area. That where they started opening up areas for. Okay. What was this? Do you recall the circulation of the paper the first year around, and what was your roughly, just a rough estimate?
I would say maybe 300 or 400.
Okay.
A week.
I see about 300 or 400 a week.
Yeah.
And did you ever increase that amount? Were you ever able to increase it?
It's possible we did. I don't recall.
How actively were you involved in the day-to-day operation of the paper, you personally?
Well, I was, you see, at that time I had besides having a job, and besides I had an office, a real estate insurance office there at 923 West Walnut. And that's where the Milwaukee Globe, I allowed it to come in since I was a part of it, and have the office there.
I see.
So I was right there all the time.
So you had your hands on. Did you make any editorial decisions, the policy decisions there?
I didn't make any decisions. Some criticisms, but I didn't.
Okay, that's good. That's needed too. Yes. Our time is sort of running down. I kind of want to recap a little bit. There's so much to still talk about, and hopefully that at some future time we can come back and talk a little bit more and pick up from where we left off. But in sort of a wrap-up sense, what would you say about that experience of a black newspaper? Do you feel that it benefited the community at all, and if so, how? And what do you see as the trend now in terms of black newspapers?
Well, I think its existence benefited the community because it was an example, or it pointed out the fact what a voice could do.
I see.
You see, and it has gone on from that, and I think it was a benefit.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And what about the trend today? Now, today we have 3 African-American newspapers. You have the Milwaukee Courier, Times, Community Journal. You know, are they still doing that same direction, taking that direction in leadership?
I think they are.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. And so there's still, I assume, still room for growth as you...
Oh, yeah. Well, they can still, I'm sure they could use a lot more advertising.
Sure, that's right, always the case.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Carter, I really thank you for coming and being our guest this evening and covering with us a little brief history about the Milwaukee Globe, which I definitely feel was an important part of this community, and also a history tablet for us to be able to go back to and look at from years ago. Again, thank you so much for your help. We have tried to cover in the past various aspects of our community. We went to the religious community, and we also talked with gentlemen who were in education.
Yes.
And this puts another piece of the puzzle together. So hopefully in the future we can come back and talk a little bit more about that time period, 1946, 47, 48, and hopefully we can look at that. But again, thank you for your help and recalling. I know sometimes it's very difficult to recall those names and dates, but your memory seemed to be well, you know.
Well, I have other things which I was involved.
Right, and we'd like to talk about some of that as well, you know, some of the other. I understand your wife was the president of the NAACP?
No, she was the first secretary.
First secretary of the NAACP.
First paid secretary.
Thank you so much for your being the guest.
Welcome.